Hello. So I wanted to say a few words to you about modifiers, specifically qualifiers and intensifiers. Now, qualifiers and intensifiers are words or phrases that are added to another word to modify its meaning, either by limiting it, as in he was somewhat busy, in which case somewhat would be the limiting, the qualifier there, or by enhancing it, such as the dog was very cute, in which case very would be the intensifier. The qualifiers can play an important role in your writing, giving your reader clues about how confident you feel about the information you're presenting. Another word for this is called hedging. It's an important feature of academic writing because academic writers need to clearly indicate whether they think claims are certain, likely, unlikely, or just false. But excessive use of qualifiers can make you sound unsure of your facts. It can also make your writing too informal. Right, so you don't want to use too many qualifiers, and we'll look at some examples of more qualifiers here in a second, because it can make it sound too uncertain. You want to, be very conscientious about when you're hedging your claims. If everything is qualified and limited, then it starts to take you out of the realm of argument altogether. Part of making an assertion is saying that it's valid and supportable. So if everything is uncertain, if everything is limited and hedged on, then it might make the reader start to doubt the validity of the argument that's being made, the validity of the assertion that's being made. So qualifiers and intensifiers are kind of the antidote to overuse of absolute words. So absolute words are like all, every, is, was, will be, none, always, never, certainly, impossible. These are some absolute words saying that, in every circumstance, such and such applies. And if you just watch the video commentary on openers and introductions, and I was talking about since the dawn of time type openers, this is kind of a related issue. Now, absolute words, it's not to say never use absolute words, but only use them if you're sure that you're making an absolute statement. There's a strong tendency to, in student papers a lot, to say things like, to say that all Americans use social media, or every American has been worried about political unrest over the last 4 years or something like that, right? All Americans certainly love McDonald's, right? Something like that. Those kind of pitfalls. It's incredibly insupportable. There's no way to back that up. I think that you could easily take a poll on the street with a sentence like that. If you said all Americans have always certainly loved McDonald's, and you went out to the street, you could, within asking 10 people, you could probably find somebody pretty quickly that feels very differently about McDonald's. Right? So it's completely insupportable. And that's kind of, I just pulled that one out, that example, but I frequently read things like that in student papers. Uh, these kind of absolute claims, it's not uncommon at all. So that reference is about McDonald's, but it could be about anything, and it's as equally insupportable, in every case. Whenever you're making references, especially to some kind of public opinion, to some kind of public consensus, absolute words will very rarely be applicable, unless you're dealing with a very controlled group, a very precise group, that you can actually verify that let's say that you're talking about, to keep using the McDonald's example, let's say that you have 10 people in your house right now. In that case, you could ask those 10 people, and if they all agree, then you could say, all 10 of the people in my house right now have always certainly loved McDonald's. You could say something like that because as controlled, the study group is, the case study group is, there's a way to verify it and be certain about it. You can pretty much never make those sorts of claims about everyone in America or everyone in the world or every teenager, right? Whatever the case may be. That's not to say that you can never use absolute words, but just be sure that if you're using them, it's supportable, that every so-and-so, it can actually be verified. Right, so here's a few examples of qualifying words. Things like may, probably, the majority, might be, possibly, rarely, numerous, a small minority, many. Right. So to use that same example, I think you could fairly say many Americans have always loved McDonald's. I think that would be fair enough to say, right? Um, just by the sheer fact that McDonald's is all over America and it's only been growing since its conception. Right? I think that's a fairly supportable claim. You could say something like many Americans have been concerned about political unrest over the last 4 years. Things like that. The key takeaway here is to make sure that you limit your claims. Make sure that you're stating things in a realistic, supportable way. There's a big difference between saying never and rarely. There's a big difference between saying probably and certainly, right? There's a big difference between saying the majority and everyone, right? Or numerous and everyone, or is and might be, right? There's a huge difference between these things, and it might feel like just a very small, subtle change, but that small, subtle change can make a huge difference. And on that note, you can use intensifiers like a lot, really, very. And the interesting thing about intensifiers is even though it might feel like you're amplifying your claim, but in doing so, you're actually in effect limiting that statement. You're quantifying in some way. If you quantify something, you limit that thing, and you can make it supportable. So there's a big difference between saying the people of America use Facebook. There's a big difference between that and saying a lot of the people in America use Facebook. Because the people of America could reasonably be read as all of the people in America, right? Most logical people probably wouldn't read it that way, but there are ways that is what it is saying effectively. And so once you start to present minor holes in your logic, the whole thing can start to break down. So you'd want to qualify that. You want to limit it. And sometimes limiting things means saying, sort of amplifying them. Right, but these simple words are also a way of creating a sense of measurement and weight, right? And this is something that might come in handy when you get to compare and contrast here very soon, which is quantifying things against each other, weighing things in relation to each other. Mickey Mouse might be cute, but Piglet is very cute, or something like that, right? If you're arguing for the lovability of Mickey Mouse versus Piglet from Winnie the Pooh, right? Mickey Mouse and Piglet are both cute, but Piglet is very cute, whereas Mickey Mouse is just a little bit cute. Again, that's just for illustrative purposes. But the point is that in logical analysis and argumentation, and especially in compare and contrast, you're weighing things against each other. You're balancing things. You're quantifying things. If you're taking part in a debate of any kind, you can think of it as a kind of scale, right? You're weighing the evidence at hand you're weighing the evidence in support of this claim that you're making against the evidence in support of the antithesis to your claim. And the side that falls down to the floor, that's heaviest with reasonable evidence, that's the side that you should take. And if neither side is falling heavily down, then you might want to move towards the middle or rearrange some of that evidence. All right, but the key takeaway here is to be careful about making insupportable claims. Anything that is stated absolutely or with full uncertainty, make sure that if you're saying something with absolute certainty, you can, if you had to, you could actually prove it, right? Things that are stated with certainty are things that are provable. And a lot of things that are based in interpretation and analysis aren't exactly provable. You're trying to show the validity of your interpretation based on the evidence at hand. But for most of the things that you're writing about, if by the very nature of a thesis, it means that you're taking part in a conversation around a debatable issue, then that means it's very hard to state things with absolute certainty most of the time.